university of life. And what that actually involved was working in factories for about 6 months. And after working in factories for 6 months, I thought maybe real university might actually be better than the university of life. And the only thing I was really any good at or interested in was reading. And so I kind of thought, maybe I should just go and spend 3 years reading books. That sounds good. And that was basically my motivation. It was the only thing I'd been really good at school, and I had no career plan, no idea what I was going to do after I graduated. Even after I graduated, I had no idea what I was going to do with an English literature degree. And I didn't have a clue what it really qualified me to do. I remember when I actually graduated feeling very disillusioned and thinking, the only thing I can do is sit in pubs and talk about poetry. You know, how am I going to make any money? It's a good way of spending money, sitting in pubs, talking about poetry, but it's a really bad way of making money. And it took me a long time to kind of realise that actually, when I started teaching and when I started writing, having done English literature was actually very useful. And it helped me just think about language a bit more and be curious about language and kind of notice things about language. But it took me about 3 years after graduating to realise that it had been useful in some way. So if you're sitting there thinking, I've no idea why I'm studying literature, pretty normal, I think, personally. So, you know, don't feel guilty for not immediately answering the question. I think maybe the best way to do things would just be if anyone has anything you want to ask. Feel free to ask, and I'll do my best to answer and see what you come up with. It's primarily an approach to language rather than an approach to teaching, okay? It's a way of looking at language and thinking about language that sees grammar and vocabulary as basically being inseparable or always interconnected. And I think when I first started teaching, for a long time, the way I was doing my teaching was, I was teaching grammar structures in one lesson, and I was teaching words in another lesson. Separate, okay? And often, without really thinking about what students were going to do with this stuff, without thinking about how they join it all together, without thinking about how does that grammar and that bunch of vocabulary help them do what? You know, I wasn't clear about that. And I had one moment where I kind of had this light bulb moment. I had this Korean student I was teaching, and she was kind of intermediate level student. She was a really great woman. And one day I was waiting for the lift at the university, and the lift doors opened, and there were 2 people inside, and she was standing next to me, and she didn't get in. And she was kind of talking to herself, like doing this weird thing. And I was curious, like, what's your problem? why are you doing this? So I didn't get in the lift, and I said to her, like, Nanju, what's the problem? And she said, okay, lift doors open at the moment, temporary action, present continuous, I know. And already I'm kind of thinking, oh my God, I've created a monster. And she then said, phrasal verbs, to go up, to go down, I know. I was like, okay. British English, lift, American English, elevator, I know. And it's like, I've done all these lessons with them. I've done present continuous. But usually in the present continuous lessons, it would be stupid things like, you know, am I playing the guitar? No, you're riding a horse. You know, look at the picture. What are they doing? She is sleeping. You know, he is washing the dishes. Really weird sentences.
It's not real. They help to certain degrees.
But when was the last time you stood outside a building saying, excuse me, she's sleeping? I mean, it's like English for murderers. It's like, it's really creepy. The idea that you'd stand outside a house and point into windows and tell someone else what's happening in those windows is really weird when you think about it. I had the vocabulary combined, and always showing students, basically, not showing them single words, not just kind of writing to go up on the board. It's thinking like, okay, if you're going to teach go up, what goes up? Okay, so prices go up, unemployment goes up, inflation goes up. Okay, what might you say? You might say prices have gone up dramatically over, you know, since the start of the war. Prices have gone up 50% over the last 6 months. Okay, inflation has, often used with the present perfect. Okay, so then what I'm thinking is, when I'm giving my examples, okay, if something goes up, it increases. For example, you know, prices have gone up 20% since the start of the year. And then kind of thinking about how can I use the group. So thinking, okay, anything else that can go up apart from prices? Yeah, inflation, yeah, taxes, okay, anything else? And then kind of just trying to work from the group like that. And what's the opposite? Yeah, gone down. Sadly, you don't get to say prices have gone down very much, but you know, maybe one day. And it's kind of thinking about the language in terms of how the grammar and the vocabulary interact, really. And I think for a long time, what I used to do was just teach the meanings, you know, and the meanings are the easy bit. If you've got a bilingual class, you just translate the meaning. Okay? It's super easy. Or you just act the meaning. So if you're teaching something like pass out, you kind of go, if you pass out, and you pretend to fall on the floor and students go, oh, pass out. Well, that's the meaning, but what are you going to do with that word? Okay, what does that word do in normal language? So for me, I guess the lexical approach is thinking about how words work and how words interact with grammar, thinking about how grammar interacts with words and how it interacts with other bits of grammar, and thinking about how all of that combines in normal, everyday communication. And just trying to show students, give students a bit more information about the way the language works, in a way. So for me, it's just about better teaching. It's like, if you're going to teach, I don't know, lift and elevator, well, when are you going to need the lift? What does anyone do with the word lift? Well, when you know, so it might just be something like, sorry, excuse me, where's the lift? Just that, you know, just simple little things like that. And that's much better than teaching lift, UK, elevator, US. It's just giving students a bit more information. It recycles grammar more because students are seeing grammar in action all the time, every day in the examples. And I think also it comes from working from students. So when you're hearing students saying things, especially low-level students, they don't often use much grammar. Okay, so they'll often kind of go, yesterday I am to shopping, I am to buy, and they'll tell you some kind of story about something they bought when they were shopping. And often they'll kind of know the vocabulary they need to tell you that story, but they grammar it all wrong. So I guess what I'm interested in is kind of thinking about working with that and saying, oh right, so you went shopping, yeah? Where did you go? Okay, and you bought what? Oh, okay. And kind of re-grammaring it in a human way that's listening to them and helping them kind of construct those stories together. And I think the way I was trained to teach didn't teach me to do that. I think I only got to that stage when I started thinking about how language fit together. I think also the longer I teach, the more I realise, particularly if you want to become really fluent, okay? Most students just learn language to the level they need, and you know, I understand that. My best foreign language is Indonesian. I lived in Indonesia for 3 years in the 90s. I still speak upper intermediate Indonesian. I make mistakes, there's lots of things I don't know. I know how to work around the gaps in my Indonesian. I can go there for 3 weeks and only speak Indonesian and survive, okay? I know that I don't sound like an imaginary native speaker. I know that I'm never going to sound like that. I know that I make loads of mistakes. I know that people can listen to me immediately on the phone and know I'm not Indonesian. I don't care. I'm never going to get to that stage of being, you know, some imaginary perfect speaker. And I think most students are like that. Most students have sentences or phrases that you've learned or that you've taught in English and in first language. Okay? And what that does is it allows you to capture the gaps between the two languages. Okay? And I have a quick story about this. Please indulge me. I had a French student years ago in a first certificate class called Pascal. And somehow Pascal got to upper intermediate, basically by speaking French in English. Okay? So Pascal would say things like,
For me, it is not necessary for to study the grammar because all the people with whom I am speaking are telling me that I am comprehensible. Okay? And I would say, so you're telling me you think you don't have to study grammar because everyone understands you. This is what I am saying? So no, it's not. What you said was directly translated from French. What I said was how you say that in English. It is equivalent. No, it's not the same. Okay? The same equivalent. And he really hated me telling him this. He was like, if everyone understands me, what's the problem? It's like, the problem is, you're in my first certificate class, right? And speaking like that, you're not going to pass. I'll tell you now, you're going to fail, because you're actually speaking French in English. And what I realised with him was, one day, I started to get him to translate things, okay? So I said to him, look, I'm going to give you some sentences, okay, Pascal? Here's the English, I want you to write the French version. Next lesson, I'm going to show you the French version. You're going to tell me exactly, word for word, the English version. And he was like, oh, this is so stupid, I'm thinking English. You think in English. Okay, good luck. So this should be very easy for you then. Please indulge me. I'll tell you what, let's put some money on it, okay? If you can do it, I'll give you £5, okay? Because I know you. Safe bet, basically. So we had 2 or 3 sentences. One of them was, I haven't seen you for ages. Yeah, pretty straightforward, simple sentence. He's like, oh, very stupid, you point it is the same. So he wrote the French translation. Next lesson, I said, can you give me that piece of paper? I folded it in half. It's like, this is like a weapon that I'm going to hit you really hard with now, Pascal. So, okay, there's the French sentences. Have a look at that one. Tell me the English. And he looked at it and said, in English it's the same? Well, no, it's not the same because that's actually in French there, mate. So tell me the English version. It is a long time since I did not see you. Okay, which is a direct word-for-word translation from French. And it was like, okay, let's check. Okay, there's the £5. Let's check. Oh, you got it wrong. I haven't seen you for ages. And you could see this kind of, took the money. Yeah, you can see this light bulb coming on in his head where it's like, ah. And I think for a lot of students, that's how it works. They see English, they understand it, they can translate it into their own language. When they come to speak English, what they do is they translate directly word for word from their own language, and they are comprehensible. Okay, but they're never going to pass first certificate.
Use of English in the classroom. And you know, the basic recommendation was start trying to use some. Because what I would watch was a whole hour lesson where the only English was this guy he had this sentence, do you like golf? And the students would go, yes I do, no I don't. And he would kind of go, do you like a golf ball? And you kind of go, no I don't. Good, do you like a golf ball? Yes I do. Do you like a golf ball? And then he'd talk for 20 minutes in Japanese. And I had this translator, I was like, what's he talking about? He's explaining the grammar. The grammar's, do you like, do you like football? Do you like sushi? Do you like K-pop? There is no grammar. What do you say about it? And so that kind of high school teaching, it was insane. I mean, it was just 55 minutes of lecturing them in Japanese with the kids sitting there kind of going, kind of falling asleep, and then him shouting, do you like a golf ball at them again? What they're now doing in Japanese high schools is they're using chatbots, okay? And the kids are going into class and there'll be a little smiling avatar face kind of going, hi, how are you? Today, we're going to talk about likes, okay? Do you like golf? And you kind of go, no, I hate it. Okay, and you'll go, oh, okay. What sports do you like? And it can do that kind of stuff, So you can ask it to, you can have a kind of 2-person conversation. You can ask it to do, I did it in Indonesian. I want to have an informal Indonesian conversation at upper intermediate level about football. Okay, and it just does it. It kind of asks you, like, so do you like football? And you kind of go, yeah, I do. And then it asks you, like, what team do you support? And how are they doing this year? And so, if what you're talking about in terms of human interaction is that, it can do all that already. What it can't do is have real conversations, because it's not real, So it can only do it in a kind of predictable way. What's interesting though is if you do it again and you kind of ask it again, can I have another uproot to immediate conversation in informal Indonesian about football, it'll be slightly...
Use them without sounding ridiculous. You know, but I like knowing about those kinds of things. I guess in terms of things that annoy me, it would be to do with the way in which language has become caught up in the culture war, okay? And I think the way in which certain bits of vocabulary have become used as terms of abuse or weapons in the kind of culture war. So particularly living in England, all this stuff about, young woke people, the snowflake generation. I mean, as soon as I hear people talk like this, I make sure I try and avoid them before I end up punching them, because I know where all that's coming from, and I know what feeds all of that kind of mentality. And I mean, as soon as I hear someone use a word like woke, it tends to be like, I know where you're coming from. So I guess I wish that language hadn't become so massively kind of polarising and politicising like that. And that's been kind of accelerated by online and by social media and all of that kind of thing. And there are kind of reverse versions, so I don't know if you know this idea of gammon. No? So there's a gammon thing like a ham, okay, like a kind of big red ham, which is a gammon. Around the time of Brexit, people started using it as a term of abuse to talk about the kind of angry, red-faced white men who were always on TV kind of going, problem with this country is there's too many immigrants and the European Union's encouraging it. And people started kind of going, I saw another gammon on TV last night moaning about things. And as someone who has one of those faces but isn't one of those people, it kind of entertained me, but I also see that stuff's dangerous because it's language that becomes weaponised and used as part of the culture war, and it's like us and them. We're these people, they're those people. And that's really dangerous. I don't know anything about where they're from, tell me more. It's a good thing, so long as you can understand each other. And most people can generally understand each other. And you can spend another 100 hours doing weird phonetic exercises. It improves your communicative competence that much, And you get weird questions. I mean, I often get asked things like, what do you think about American English? And I know that what they want me to say is, it's a vulgar, degraded form of the language spoken by barbarians. And for me, it's like, well, whose American English are we talking about? Because like when I listen to Trump, I get the fear, basically. When I listen to, I don't know, Timothy Snyder or someone, the professor, I think there's hope for humanity yet, what an amazing articulate man. What I'm listening to isn't the way they articulate their vowels, I'm listening to what's coming out of their mouths. And I kind of think that anyone who listens to someone and judges them by their accent rather than by what they're saying, it's a bit weird. So it's not healthy. It's like, listen to the person. Listen to the person. What are they saying? If you can't understand them, that's another issue. Okay, but that may also, it's also a two-way issue. Yeah, because you may not understand them, but for me they may be perfectly intelligible. Yeah? And so, who's got the problem then? Is it them or you? Or is it the two of you together that needs to work out a way of communicating? So, there's also that idea that there is such a thing as intelligibility. But intelligibility is always a two-way street. Always. I find it sometimes in London. I'm in shops and I hear people speaking and I realise I'm the only one that understands this person because I'm an English teacher. I was in a shop recently, there was a Japanese woman and she said, I want a lot. Okay, and the guy's going, sorry, love? She goes, a lot. And I suddenly go, she's trying to say rope, but she doesn't really want rope, she wants string, which is what this is about, okay? So I said, I think she wants a ball of string, mate.